There's a quiet death that creeps into the soul of a man who tries too hard to be liked. It starts as a whisper, a subtle impulse to avoid conflict, a tendency to say yes when you mean no, a smile when your spirit says frown, a compliment when what's needed is confrontation. And you convince yourself it's good, that being agreeable, gentle, and endlessly patient will eventually win her over, that your kindness will be your sword and shield in the battle of attraction, that if you are just nice enough, she will stay. But she doesn't want nice. She wants strong. And deep down, you know it. Because niceness is not the same as goodness. And strength is not cruelty. Strength is presence, clarity, conviction. The man who knows who he is. The man who does not bend because of a passing emotion, nor collapse under the pressure of disapproval. The man who stands not to dominate, but because he knows the ground he walks on is sacred. She doesn't want the man who tiptoes around her moods like a servant of her storm. She wants the man who remains still unshaken in the eye of the hurricane. You see, we have confused compliance with compatibility. And in doing so, we have created a generation of men who betray their own souls in the name of being loved. And what's left behind is a ghost. A man who flinches at his own desires, who apologizes for his masculinity, who fears taking up space in his own life. But here's the truth she won't say out loud. She cannot respect a man who fears his own fire. She cannot admire a man who makes her the center of his universe before he has even built his own. And she cannot trust a man who disappears at the first sign of disapproval. Why? Because your niceness is a mask, a performance, a strategy, not a truth. And deep down, she knows it. Just as the lioness can smell weakness, the feminine can sense when the masculine has abandoned itself. She will test you, not because she's cruel, but because she's searching for the edge of your strength, the boundary of your spine, the line where your soul says, this far, no further. And if you cannot show it, she will lose face. Not because she doesn't love you, but because she no longer trusts you can hold the weight of her chaos. The feminine is storm, beauty, depth, seduction, fire. It is not meant to be managed. It is meant to be danced with from your center. But that dance requires strength, not arrogance, not aggression, not domination. True strength, the kind that makes a woman feel safe in her surrender. Because contrary to the lies of modern sentimentality, love is not found in weakness. It is forged in strengths. It is magnetized by purpose. It is sustained by clarity. And it is tested in the fires of resistance. The nice guy flees from those fires. The strong man walks through them. He does not fear rejection because he's not dependent on approval. He does not bend to please because he's loyal to his own truth. He does not become passive because he knows that every moment he avoids confrontation, he is secretly resenting himself. And resentment is poison to love. Carl Jung once said, the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. That is strength. The man who is not hiding, the man who is not performing, the man who has confronted his shadow and made peace with it, not to destroy it, but to integrate it. You must become that man. You must become the one who looks in the mirror and sees both the king and the killer, both the saint and the sinner. And you must make them shake hands, because until you do, you will remain split a half man, living half a life. The world is full of nice guys who have never looked their darkness in the eye, who are polite, accommodating, and agreeable but secretly seething inside. Weakness disguised as virtue. Suffering disguised as humility. Manipulation disguised as love. But the woman sees through it all. Because a woman doesn't fall in love with a man who gives her everything she wants. She falls in love with the man who gives her what she needs, even when she resists it. The man who holds her to a higher standard. The man who calls out her potential. The man who leads, not from fear, but from vision. And leadership requires strength, not control, not coercion, strength. And strength begins where niceness ends. Nice is easy, nice is surface, nice is shallow, but strong is deep. Strong is honest. Strong is rooted in something far more powerful than approval, truth. You must become the man who is not afraid to disappoint others to remain loyal to himself. You must become the man who can say no, not because he wants conflict, but because he knows peace without integrity is just quiet misery. That is the man she craves, the man she tests you to become. She doesn't want your gifts. She wants your growth. She doesn't want your validation. She wants your vision. She doesn't want you to serve her emotions. She wants you to command your own. And until you become that, she may stay, but she will never fully trust you because she will never fully feel you. Because to feel a man is to feel his edge, his clarity, his unwillingness to collapse, his refusal to abandon himself no matter how seductive her chaos becomes. This is the alchemy of polarity. Masculine presence and feminine flow, stillness and storm, direction and depth. And this dance only works when both know who they are. So stop chasing her approval. Stop bending to her moods. Stop apologizing for your truth. And start standing like a man who remembers his ancestors, who remembers the warrior within, the king within, the wolf within. Because nice men get thanked, strong men get followed. She doesn't want your peace if it costs your power. She doesn't want your comfort if it costs your conviction. She doesn't want your attention if it costs your authenticity. She wants to feel your spine, your silence, your strength. She wants to know that if the world collapses, you won't. That if the storm rages, you will remain. That if she loses herself in her emotion, you will be there not as her mirror, but as her mountain. So let her cry, let her test, let her doubt, but never let it shake your soul. Because if you abandon your center every time she abandons hers, you are no longer man, you are her reflection. And she already has a mirror. What she needs is a man, not perfect, but present, not flawless, but fearless, not agreeable, but awake. And when you become that, she will melt, not because you changed for her, but because you finally became you. And in that becoming, you didn't lose her. You led her, because leading her was never about control. It was never about domination or some primitive performance of power. No real leadership in the eyes of the feminine is presence. It is the man who carries a world within him, so she doesn't feel the need to carry the weight of hers alone. She doesn't want you to take her power, she wants you to activate yours. Because deep down, every woman with a soul rooted in the feminine is seeking something sacred in her partner. The man who can hold the chaos of the universe in his chest and still breathe slowly. The man who can walk through the fire of her emotion without shrinking, flinching, or fleeing. The man who can look at her at her worst and not try to fix her, but stand with her. To the modern man, this sounds like mysticism, but it's not. It's the oldest story ever told. It is the ancient masculine archetype, the spine of the world that refuses to collapse. Nice collapses, nice becomes whatever she needs in the moment, even if it means disfiguring his own truth. Strong does not, and that's why she wants strong. Because only strength, real, grounded, spiritual strength, allows a woman to relax into her natural state. Not a transactional calmness, but the deeper feminine surrender that says, I don't need to be everything, because he is something. But if you become nice in the face of her fire, she burns you. If you become passive in the face of her tests, she forgets why she chose you. If you become reactive, defensive, or emotionally needy, you become a burden, not a pillar. And make no mistake, the feminine hates burdens disguised as protectors, because niceness, when it is not rooted in strength, becomes a mask for fear. You're not being kind, you're being afraid of rejection, you're not being generous, you're being desperate for validation. You're not listening to her, you're trying to avoid losing her. That is not love. That is spiritual cowardice. You were not born to play the supporting role in a drama where you hope to earn approval in exchange for your silence. You were born to become a man whose soul commands respect before he even speaks, not because he demands it, but because he radiates something ancient. Stillness, direction, resolve. There's a reason the great men of myth and history were not remembered for how agreeable they were. They were remembered for their courage, their ability to stand for what others feared to speak, their refusal to betray themselves, even when the world screamed for compliance. Do you think Marcus Aurelius was nice when Rome trembled? Do you think Alexander wept because he wasn't liked? Do you think Nietzsche would have sacrificed his mind just to be more emotionally available? No, because they knew, as you must now know, that greatness, real greatness, is forged in solitude, in rejection, in fire. It is not awarded, it is chosen. The strong man is not addicted to being understood. He is not waiting for a woman to complete him. He is already whole, and from that wholeness, he chooses her. That is why she respects him, because the deepest fear of the feminine is to trust a man who does not know where he's going. The second deepest fear is to follow a man who changes his direction every time she cries. That's why her tests are sacred. They are not attacks. They are initiations, rituals disguised as chaos. She's not looking for your surrender, she's looking for your backbone. Because every time she pushes, she's silently asking, is he sure of himself? Does he know who he is? Can he hold this? And if the answer is yes, truly, deeply yes, she softens, not out of weakness, but out of reverence. You become the man she can trust, not just when it's easy, but when it's dark. Not just when she agrees with you, but when she's drowning in her own doubts. Not just when she smiles, but when she screams. Because you are no longer reactive, you are responsive. No longer chasing her validation. You are offering your vision, no longer avoiding conflict. You are mastering it. And in that moment, you transcend the nice guy paradigm. You exit the boyhood dream of being everything she wants, and you step into the manhood reality of being everything you are. From there, attraction isn't something you try to generate, it's something you naturally emit. Because polarity is not a performance, it is a byproduct of inner truth. She doesn't need your flowers if you don't have a spine. She doesn't need your affection if your soul is for sale. She doesn't need your promises if your presence is hollow. And yet, if you do the work, if you go into your cave, confront your demons, reconcile your darkness, and return with clarity, she will follow you anywhere. Not because you made her, not because you begged her, but because your being spoke to something primal in hers. You reminded her that the masculine is not just needed, it is sacred. You reminded her that strength is not the opposite of sensitivity, it is its container. You reminded her that a man can be gentle without being weak and fierce without being cruel, because you have become what she did not even know she was seeking. A man who is nice because he is kind, not because he's afraid. A man who is present not to please but to lead. A man who is strong not for approval but because the world requires it. That is who you must become. And that journey begins in silence, where no one sees you, where no one claps, where no one understands, where you begin to strip away every identity that was crafted for survival and rediscover the soul that was made for sovereignty. This isn't about women. This isn't even about relationships. This is about becoming the kind of man who cannot be bought, broken, or bent, because he has faced himself, all of himself, and come out whole. This is your call, to leave behind the shell of the nice guy, to let the old version of you, the agreeable, passive, approval-seeking version, die, and to rise as something truer, something deeper, something unshakable. And you will be hated for this, not always, not by everyone, but by those who benefited from your submission, by the ones who mistook your silence for compliance, your patience for permission, your kindness for weakness. They will resent the man who no longer bends, who no longer apologizes for existing with power, who no longer plays the self-sacrificing martyr just to be liked. Because when you stop being nice and start being real, the world has to adjust. And it doesn't always like to. She may resist it too. She may test your newfound spine. She may panic when the familiar yes man no longer shows up at her emotional doorstep like a servant to her whims. She may cry louder, argue harder, pull away, let her. Because if you abandon your truth just to hold on to her approval, you will resent her and lose yourself. This is where the boy dies and the man is born. Because a boy seeks permission. The man lives with purpose. The boy tries to impress. The man leaves an impression. The boy negotiates his boundaries for affection. The man sets them and watches who stays. You see, she doesn't need another admirer. She doesn't need a pet. She needs polarity. She needs tension. She needs the healthy resistance that arises when two whole beings meet and neither flinches. She doesn't want your surrender. She wants your steadiness. Because here's the sacred paradox. The more grounded you become, the more free she feels. The more anchored you are in your truth, the more she can let go in hers. But if you keep showing up as the nice guy, the man who smiles while swallowing his pain, who agrees to avoid friction, who withholds truth to maintain peace, you're not creating harmony. You're creating a prison for both of you. Because what you repress becomes what you resent. And what you resent, eventually, you destroy. That is why so many relationships die not in violence, but in silence. The silence of men who stopped speaking their truth, who let their edges be sanded down by comfort and compromise, who mistook emotional obedience for love. And that is not love. That is self-erasure. She doesn't want the ghost of who you could have been. She wants the man who chose not to disappear. This is what Carl Jung meant when he said, a man who is not conscious of himself lives in the prison of his own reactions. Reactions, defensiveness, passivity, pleasing. These are the chains, the spiritual slavery that binds modern men. And niceness unchecked, unguided by inner strength is one of the tightest chains of all. Because it feels like virtue, it looks like morality. It earns praise from the world. But beneath the surface, it's often just fear, masked, hidden, polished with charm. And fear cannot lead. Fear cannot inspire. Fear cannot create the kind of presence that awakens the feminine. Only love can. But love, in its highest form, is not passive. Love is fierce. Love is fire. Love is discipline. Love is the sword that cuts through delusion. So you must love her. Yes, but not at the cost of yourself. Love her in truth. Love her from the center of your being. Love her without needing her to be your source of validation. Because when you make her your God, you cease to be her man. And the feminine, despite all its allure, was never meant to be worshipped like an idol. It was meant to be honored like a force of nature, powerful, beautiful, sometimes wild, but never your master. You are not here to orbit her moods. You are here to become the sun fixed in your own light, centered in your own gravity. She will test that because she needs to, not to break you, but to believe in you. She needs to feel your essence, not as a reaction, but as a foundation. So when the winds of her emotion blow wild and the tide of her fears rise high, she can look at you and know he will not disappear. He will not crumble. He is here. And in that moment, she surrenders, not out of obedience, but out of awe, because she has finally found what every woman craves beneath all her tests, all her stories, all her defenses. A man who is safe, not because he gives her what she wants, but because he is who he says he is. A man who listens, but does not lose himself in her noise. A man who feels, but does not drown in her storm. A man who holds space without emptying himself to fill hers. That man is not born. He is built in silence, in shadow, in suffering, in moments when no one is watching, when your heart is breaking, when your ego is dying, when the urge to please comes knocking like a siren in the night, and you say, "No, I will not abandon myself tonight." That is strength. And strength is what she needs, even if she doesn't know how to say it, even if she fights it, even if she's been trained to fear it. Because the truth is, she doesn't want you to bow to her feelings. She wants you to understand them, to feel them, but not to be ruled by them. She wants you to witness her in her fullness, without being consumed by her chaos. To see her rage and not mirror it. To see her sadness and not retreat from it. To see her light and not make it your source of worth. You do that, and something in her spirit awakens. Not because you became better, but because you became real. And real men don't need to be nice to be loved. They need to be whole. So here we stand, not at the edge of another motivational whisper, but at the precipice of a rebirth. You are not being asked to become someone new. You are being summoned to remember who you were before the world taught you to be small, before the fear of abandonment turned your fire into compliance, before the ache for love twisted your strength into submission. You were not born nice, you were born noble. You were born with a spine carved from the silence of the universe, with a voice that was never meant to tremble at the sound of disapproval, with a presence that didn't need to be explained, only felt. You are not here to beg for love. You are here to embody it, to stand like the mountain she can't move, not because you're cold, but because you're eternal, because your love is not a reaction, it's a decision, a discipline, a divine war waged against your own weakness. This is what she's been waiting for. Not a man who changes his shape every time she shifts her mood, not a man who trades his integrity for temporary intimacy, but the man who leads with the quiet authority of someone who has already died to the need for approval. This is the holy masculine, the fierce protector of inner truth, the sovereign king of his own psyche, the grounded warrior who no longer fights for dominance but for depth. So yes, she doesn't want nice, because nice is what a man becomes when he has forgotten how to hold the world without collapsing. She wants strong, because strength is the only place she can truly rest. Strength of character, strength of boundaries, strength of presence, not just for her, but for you, for the child inside you who was never allowed to roar, for the soul inside you that's sick of performing, for the man inside you that remembers what it felt like to walk tall before the world taught him to shrink. So let this be the death of the nice guy. Let this be the funeral for your fear. Let this be the moment where you remember you do not need permission to be powerful. You only need the courage to be whole. Let the world misunderstand you. Let her question you. Let your old self beg you to stay small. But you must rise, because this world is starving for men who no longer sell their souls in exchange for touch. Men who lead, not with noise, but with depth. Men who stand, even when it costs them comfort. Men who refuse to betray their inner truth for the sake of temporary peace. Be that man, not for her, not for them, for the boy who dreamed of being strong, for the man who knows now that he already is. Be that man, and you will never need to ask again what she wants, because you will have become what she cannot live without. Strong, steady, true, unshakable, unapologetic, unbreakable. And in that silence, in that stillness, in that spine of steel, wrapped in the warmth of real presence, she will find not just a lover, she will find a home. And you will have found your soul.